On this day in 1867, Marie Curie was born in Warsaw in Poland.
I want to tell you about radium.
A most peculiar and remarkable element because it does not behave as it should.
That is, of course, not the Marie Curie, but Rosamund Pike playing Marie Curie in the movie Radioactive. Curie, of course, won a Nobel Prize in Physics for her work on radioactivity with her husband Pierre Curie, becoming the first woman to ever receive the award. She was also given a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for her work isolating radium 8 years later.
On this day in 2016, Canadian singer-songwriter cheery Leonard Cohen died. Was first written as a poem about his friend the dancer Suzanne Verdel. It became his debut single. Leonard Cohen died in Los Angeles aged 82, having written and released 14 studio albums over 50 years.
And on this day, 7th of November in 1504, the explorer Christopher Colombus returned to Spain after his fourth and final transatlantic voyage. He died on May the 20th, 1506, not knowing that he had discovered the New World. Let's speak to Laurence Bergreen, who is an American biographer and best-selling author of Columbus, The Four Voyages, and he joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Remind us then, for people who don't know or don't remember, the Four Voyages, where did he go?
Well, he went in search of China, which he called India. He went 4 times. The first voyage is the most famous one in 1492, but it's in some ways the least interesting. And the fourth voyage was far more interesting. Now, he was hopelessly lost each time he went, although he was a wonderful navigator and could get from point to point. He really didn't know where he was on the globe. And you have to say in his defense that most people in Europe at that point didn't know either. So they didn't realize that the Pacific Ocean was as huge as it was, he was nowhere near China. He called it the Indies. He had brought interpreters with him, expecting to speak to Kublai Khan of all people. So he was often, hopelessly misguided in his assumptions, but he was a brilliant navigator. The fourth voyage was a great test for him. I'm not really sure, even now, having written this book, why he did it. We know a lot about it because he went with his son, Ferdinand, who wrote a detailed account. But this voyage also ended up in disaster. They were caught up in a huge hurricane, and in 1503, they were wound up. It's what's now St. Anne's Bay in Jamaica, and they were stuck there for a year, waiting for rescue. Columbus's enemies, European enemies, and Spanish enemies, Italian enemies, were in no hurry to rescue him.
Oh dear.
So basically stuck on a beach, waiting for some kind of a ship to come in. And meanwhile, the inhabitants of the area who were at first relatively calm and helpful, became more and more hostile. And he was afraid, not without reason, that they might all be murdered before they could escape. As it happened, Columbus and his pilot and astronomer who he brought along were aware that an eclipse was coming, and he said to them that he actually had magical powers. This is what he said to the people who were preparing to kill him, and if anything happened, they would be sorry because he could turn the moon red.
Oh my goodness me.
A lunar eclipse was taking place.
I see. Laurence, just finally, can you explain just a tiny bit about what actually drove him to do this? At great personal cost to himself. But what was it that actually drove him to make 4 voyages?
That's a really good question. I think the first time he was going because partly out of greed, partly because he was on a mission to convert natives to Christianity. By this time, it was more of a messianic thing, and he was beginning to lose touch with reality. On the previous voyage, the third voyage, he wrote about sailing uphill, discovering the entrance to paradise, which, by the way, he said was a little bit north of Venezuela, in case you were wondering, and was becoming more and more delusional. Also, his eyesight was badly affected. The sun had burned out his retinas. It was
Oh,
hard for him
God.
to see. So he was impaired, to put it mildly, both physically and mentally. So he was going on these instincts, and his last ditch effort to survive was to predict this lunar eclipse with the
Yes.
help of his pilots and astronomer that he brought with him, and that terrified the locals. They thought he had magical powers, and that he had caused it, and that this red moon, portended all sorts of terrible things. So they let him alone.
I see.
Finally, he was rescued, and made his way back to Spain, to Sanlúcar de Barrameda, as you mentioned, on November 7th.
Well, that is quite the story, isn't it? Laurence, thank you so much for that.